Let me tell you a few other things about who I am. Like Tracy was saying, I am very humble debate beginnings. I debated for Freeport High School in Freeport, Illinois, which is very much equivalent to, for those of you here in Texas, like a UIL circuit, probably like a 3A kind of high school or whatever. Most of our debate tournaments were on Saturdays. A couple of times a year we would venture into Chicago and get a little of the likes of what was going on in Chicago, and then we'd run back out to the farm and do kind of what we were doing in our debate world. I debated for the University of Kansas. I actually went there. I got my KU Crocs on here. I actually went to their debate workshop for 2 summers and enjoyed the campus and the people and everyone there so much that I decided to go to school there. I then coached at Wake Forest for a couple of years as a graduate student, and then coached at Illinois State University after that. And so I've been around debate for a really, really, really long time. And one of the reasons why I like to talk about theory in particular is that I'm a little bit, because of when I debated and where I debated and the programs I was associated with, and the luck of, a guardian angel, was that I'm a little bit of a debate Forrest Gump when it comes to theory arguments. And what I mean by that is I was witness, because I was assigned to scout, I was witness to the first dispositional counterplan ever run. I debated on the topic where picks started, because the framers were so silly and they put the word all in the resolution. And so, then counterplans had to be non-topical and those things, right? And so as long as you did the not all, then you could have a non-topical counterplan. And so the not all was, where picks came from. I judged the critique the second time it was run at the University of Iowa by the University of Texas, way back when. I judged E prime the first time it was run. I don't know if that's anything to be proud of, but and if you don't know what that is, like you're laughing at that. Maybe
did you vote for it?
Maybe everyone. I did vote for it. And so on and so on. Permutations. That first article was written when I was in college about why counterplans need to be competitive and those kind of things. We ran most of the critiques that you run now. We ran those as disads or extra competitive counterplans. The socialism DA is the modern version of the CAPK. The anarchy counterplan is the modern version of statism, et cetera, right? And so I love to talk about theory because I feel like over the course of my debate life, I've witnessed a lot of it, been witness to a lot of it, and those kind of things. And I also think that theory arguments really relate to kind of my debate upbringing. Theory is the one organic intellectual moment in debates, right? You create theory, right? We create theory. The participants create theory, right? It's one of the cool things about debate, right? Debate is literally one of the, most sophisticated competitive, games or events on the planet, right? Without a rule book, right? Where the rules are created by the individual participants once the door shuts. Right? Not even before the debate are you agreeing to rules of the game and those kind of things which the theory arguments relate to. Right? That's awesome. Right? You can have an influence, right? And I've witnessed it, by myself and others and those things. Right? You can have an influence over how theory arguments progress and those things. Right? I'm also excited to be talking about theory on Sunday. Seems quite appropriate. Sort of the sermon on the Mount thing. Right, Tracy was mentioning, the work I did with the National Debate Coaches Association, and one of the things that I was really excited to do when I was president of the NDCA was people would invite me to come to their school districts, like if they were having some budget issues or those kind of things, and I would talk to like school boards about like why debate's cool, why every school should have debate, and those kinds of things. And that's one of the things that I love. And one of the reasons I'm not teaching workshop this summer is I'm in an intensive graduate school program. I'm hoping to someday run a school where the whole purpose of the school is debate and debate across the curriculum and those things, right? To play off that, yeah, man. So anyway, so that's kind of where I'm coming from today. I have a lot of debate passion. I have a lot of theory, sort of insight, and I treat these things as very much an organic and empowering kind of situation, right? My whole goal today is to make you better at debating theory and theory arguments and those things, right? And you're lucky, because you're here at the workshop. My understanding is you get some theory classes where you can test this stuff out. You have, a nice set of arguments, where you can practice, some of these issues. You can use your theory classes to do some of the kind of like theory mini debates and some of those things I'm going to talk about today as a way to, make you a better theory person and those things. And so, take advantage of that. I know, this workshop, I've been associated with this workshop for a long time, and I know, that one of the philosophies of the workshop is, they want every student to leave here, with the confidence to do a file, with the confidence to, create a strategy, with the confidence to, write theory arguments and those things, and I'm hoping to give my little piece of that today. Now, some people say I look like these guys, and so I'm going to bust some theory myths. It really depends on how long the goatee is, which one, which is pretty funny. All right. Theory and you. Like I was saying, theory is the ultimate debate empowerment moment. You get to influence the rules of the game. You get to, and I wouldn't try to like write all this down, by the way. Like I'll give this out to everyone. They can post it and those things, and we can spread this around. It's much more important that you get the gist of take the things that you're gonna use in your toolbox or whatever. Like I said, I have a lot of philosophy. My goal today is to do, a little chunk on sort of framework and how to debate theory in a better way and where do some of these theory arguments come from and those things, and then take that framework and apply it to a couple of specific kind of theory issues like fiat and some of that, right? So remember, theory lets you influence the types of arguments that are allowed, and the rules of how the game's going to be played and those things. But remember, it's real important, right, that you develop your own position on these issues, right? Because you got to know where you stand. That's how the best theory debaters come. And don't remove theory from strategy. And don't remove theory from the specific arguments, right? The more that you can incorporate, it's like, hey, I have this particular counterplan that I want to use, right? I have this particular critical argument that I want to use, right? I want my affirmative, I want the, judge to view my affirmative in this particular framework, right? Develop your theory arguments with those situations in mind, because, if you try to be too general, then, you're never going to get the situation that you need to justify a particular argument. Some key questions that you should ask, right? My day job at Jesuit, one of the things I didn't mention is my day job at Jesuit. At Jesuit, we have no debate classes or anything. Everything we do with debate, we have to do after school. So we all have to have day jobs. My day job is that I'm one of the 2 counselors for the junior class, and I specialize in academic advising and testing and communication between students and their parents and coaches and teachers and that kind of stuff. And one of the things that I always like to do in that part of my job is help people develop frameworks for studying better and dealing with their busy schedules and dealing with classes that may be challenging, or a particular teacher that may be challenging and those things, right? And so a lot of what I'm going to do today is an attempt to sort of give some of those kind of frameworks or critical questions that you can ask yourself when you're in those situations, right? When you're sitting at home, writing a counterplan, and you're like, man, that's a hell of a lot of fiat. I just put down on paper, right? I got to be able to defend that. I'm hoping to give, some things for that, right? And so here's the first of those kind of framework issues, right? Some key questions you want to ask yourself. What's the purpose of the theory and debate? What are you trying to use it for? And theory gets used for lots of different things, right? One of the big reasons for theory arguments is to influence how the judge is going to decide the debate, right? One of the big influences of theory is how's the judge going to decide the debate. When we talk about framework issues and those things, that is really just, hey, I'd like the judge to prioritize this type of arguments over another type of argument, right? Prioritize discursive arguments over, cost-benefit analysis-based arguments. Prioritize, deontological questions over, questions of utility, et cetera, right? And so, that theory is designed to influence, how the judge is going to judge, right? Some theory is designed to influence, like, what arguments, can be run and not run. Whether or not a consult counterplan is legitimate or not, that theory is, the whole purpose of that is to allow for that strategy to be part of the negative arsenal account. Okay. What does the theory do for the particular issue? Does it, is the theory necessary for the argument to, commence? Is the theory really just deflection? Does the theory, if you're trying to do a counterplan that changes the laws of physics, because you decided you've grown tired of debating global warming, so you're going to counterplan with CO2 no longer causes climate change, and have to defend changing the laws of physics. Well, theory is going to be really important for that counterplan. That's going to be an uphill battle, I think, for you. Right. So that's an important question. The third one: what's allowed under the theory? Okay, this is an important one, right? If somebody's allowed to do something, or if a certain theory gets created, what does that create? What kinds of things? What else does that allow? Right? And the next question is, very important, it's a 1-2 punch there, right? What does it allow the other team? Right? I think and I'll talk about this throughout, one of the most underutilized parts of theory debates is this idea of reciprocity. If you get to do it, so do I. A quick example, that negative, man, they want lots of advocacies. They want multiple counterplans. They want multiple planes counterplans. They want, critical arguments plus counterplans plus the status quo, etc. But the minute the affirmative's like, fine, then we'll have 2 plans. What? You can't have 2 plans, right? This is policy debate, right? You can only have 1 plan. You're aft, right? What? Why do you get 7 advocacies? Because the neg needs to be flexible, right? And I only can have 1 plan because somehow there's some pure part of debate. Why doesn't the AF and the 2AC against the, the 3 counterplans and 2 critiques and those things, why don't they trot out a couple of new acts, right? That, are offense against those counterplans and critiques. Right? I mean, why is that? Right? If they can have that many advocacies, why can't you too? Right? And that's a simple one. Based on advocacies or whatever. Right? Reciprocal theories, exist all over the place in terms of fiat questions. Those kind of things. One of my favorites is on a counterplan. If the net benefit's not a disad to the plan, then who cares if the permutation is intrinsic or severance or any of those things, right? Because, the whole point of a net benefit is to prove that the counterplan is competitive or not. And if it's not, well then who cares if the permutation does something a little more, right? Those kind of reciprocal theories, right? And, and then always asking the comparative question, right? Theory should never be taken out of the idea that you are always comparing how you want the game to be played to how you don't want it to be played, right? There is always the not your worldview, okay, that exists in a theory question, right? And that's really, really important. And the reason that's important, as we'll talk about, right, is that not worldview could be, radically different. I can have, if you just take something as simple as number of advocacies, right, I could draw a line and say, each side gets 1 advocacy. pretty fair. Affirmative gets to have their plan, negative gets one advocacy. You can have the status quo, you can have a counterplan, you can have a critique alternative. You pick, get one advocacy, right? I could draw that line right there, right? And now I can compare that world to all the other options, right? Each side gets an infinite number of advocacies. Each side gets two advocacies. The affirmative gets one and the negative gets two, et cetera, right? But you should always, in all theory questions, be thinking comparative. The next important thing is thinking about the values as they relate to theory, right? If I was to ask you the question, why do you debate? How would some of you answer? Why do you debate? Why are you spending 3 weeks, 4 weeks out of your life, right? It's fun, okay? What makes it fun? What makes it fun? The intellectual aspect of it. I heard somebody say the wins and the losses. What's that? The competitive part of it. What else? Yep.
The form where our voice matters.
Yeah, it's a place to express your voice. Okay. What else? Why else do you debate? It's psychological war. Yeah, amen to that applying to theory. Okay. Right. Okay. Why else do some of you debate? Social aspect, right? You get to meet all these people. You're hoping to get some scholarship money and go to college and those kind of things, right? It's one of the few activities where you actually get to interact with, probably what is truly a cross-section and a good representation of, kind of our society, and those kind of things, right? And the reason that I ask that question, right, and the reason you should always be able on your debate team to say, what is the value of our debate team? Like, why does our debate team exist at our school? Why do we spend all that time and money and energy, in all of those classrooms around the city and the state and the country, screaming at each other from behind our computer screens, right? Why you do that, okay, is where the impact to theory arguments comes from. Okay, when you get to the impact of a theory argument, you're like, voting issue, education fairness, voting issue, competitive topic, et cetera. Okay, when you get to that moment, right, that is totally based on, right, what you are saying to a judge at that moment is, you're saying, look, you've ruined the reason why I play this game. Right? And if they're allowed to do what they're about to do, then the game's not fun anymore. Not to the point you're going to quit. Right? I always think that's one of the most absurd. I wish I could create one of those funny little cartoon, like, theory debates or whatever. Like the first priority thing. Yeah. Oh, my God. That was unbelievably funny, Brian. I'm going to do one of those for theory. Right? And one of the things that's going to be in it is, the person who whines, I'm going to quit debate, if they're allowed to do that. It's like, all right, if you're going to do that, cool. Right? That's one less person that's gaining all the cool benefits from debate. That you'll trounce that person, in the real world someday. And so, right, but the reason why do you debate and what's best for a debate, that is the whole place that, comes the impact cards, right? And so when somebody says counterplan, change the laws of physics, CO2 is not going to cause warming anymore, right? The reason why you're like, hey, that's dirty cheating, right, is all the reasons why you debate, right? There's no intellectual thing to that, right? There's no research element to it, right? It's a totally fiat-based thing, right? It ruins the competitive, equitable game, right? I got this, what may be the most significant problem in the world, and you get to, like, magic wand it away, okay? How fun is that, right? It's not varied, right? We all go 50% at every tournament. It's a speaker point battle, et cetera, right? And so when you get to the impact portion of your theory arguments, right, it's important to think about the reasons why you debate, right? And to think about these categories, right? The, topic-specific knowledge versus education, right? And that sort of comparison. People say, it's good to learn about politics. Well, yeah, but you can always do that, right? It's even better to learn about transportation infrastructure, okay, and how it's funded, and the different programs, and those things, right? The role of evidence. I know that we don't care anymore about qualifications and where evidence comes from and those kind of things, I'll say this right now. I'm thinking of adding something to my judging philosophy. I may just put a line in there to see if anyone's reading them anymore. That I'm going to give a 30 to anybody who reads quals for all their cards. Because as I've been reading about this topic, there's some really qualified people out there, and you can't tell me, right, that the 27 seconds, that all the quals in the 1AC add up to, right, that somehow is trading off with the key 27 seconds of your speech currently. And so, I'm thinking about putting that in the philosophy, right, because evidence is really, really important, right? We've also, gotten a little, we've taken kind of a fortune cookie approach to evidence a little bit, and a little cookie cutter, right? We love the big paragraphs, and we can highlight, the 17 words in that big paragraph, and call that evidence, right? Well, that's going to be an important, and the role of evidence is crucial in most of these theory issues, right? When people say something isn't theoretically justified, usually it's because it removes the evidence, and it removes the research element, it removes the strategy element, those kind of things. Critical and strategy thinking, the competitive equity issue, right? One side always wins, that's not fair. The act of God, counterplan, the change laws of physics, right? The affirmative framework that says we spoke first, therefore we win. Links of omission, et cetera, et cetera. And lastly, real world analogies, right? Especially with theory arguments. Theory and most things in debate come from Congress. They come from the court. They come from, right, personal advocacy, social movements, those kinds of things, right? There are real world examples of every voice and every advocacy that you're defending. Use those analogies in your theory argument. One of my big things that I try to, tell people to use when you're thinking about theory arguments is think about things in terms of theory continuums, right? That you're really talking about a sliding scale of a particular issue, right? And there are extreme endpoints. And it's usually those extreme endpoints, right, that people are scared of or worried about with their theory arguments, right? And if you can show how somebody, gets close to those endpoints, then you can usually win a theory argument, right, that their argument's bad. And if you can say, hey, I'm nowhere close to, those endpoints, then you can usually defend your theory argument, right? And some examples of these continuums, right? And I think this really is if you think about it, almost every theory argument that we have in debate comes from one of these, like, core questions, right? It comes from, these core kinds of issues, right? The easiest continuum is the fiat continuum, right? If you say at one end of the continuum, and I'll talk about this a little more in the second half when I use fiat as an example of some of these framework issues, but if you take no fiat as one end, right? If we lived in a world where there was no such thing as fiat, right? Well, then the affirmative, what we know as inherency would have to change, because instead of saying the plan is not passing in the status quo when we need to, if there was no such thing as fiat, then the affirmative would say this affirmative is about to pass in the status quo, and that's a really good thing, right? So you have no fiat on one end, right? On the other end of that continuum is infinite fiat. Now, what kind of world would that be if, both sides got infinite fiat? Well, that wouldn't be a very fun debate either, right? Because if infinite fiat, then we get laws of physics, act of God, right? There's no role of evidence anymore, right? It's just it's a Harry Potter trick game, et cetera, right? And so we know that both of those extremes, no fiat and infinite fiat, right? We know both of those extremes are bad. And when you list the 5 or 6 reasons for why those extremes are bad, right, then everything in between that, right, no fiat, international fiat, private actor fiat, all of those things, you can relate to those endpoints, right? You can say, hey, if we're allowed international fiat, what does that do for evidence? What does that do for, the ability to, debate? What does that do for, competition, et cetera, right? Resolution versus plan focus. Okay, what's the focus of the debate? Prove the resolution? If so, then the affirmative can have multiple advocacies. The negative doesn't have to have specific links, right? This is where the idea of multiple counterplans comes from. et cetera, right? Discursive focus versus real world focus. Okay, this has become the crux of framework debates these days, right? Is, at one end, of that continuum is the only thing that matters is what we say and how we say it. Right? At the other end of that continuum is the only thing that matters is the purest form of real world application. Right? How, and we know both of those are met. Okay, you can't have, the debate game would melt down if we had to play 100% real world, right? It would also melt down if it was 100% about like what we said, only, right? And so you have everything in between that, right? Number of advocacies, right? This is my favorite one, and my understanding is this is the topic of your theory groups this afternoon. It's like conditionality and dispositionality and those kind of things, right? This is an awesome continuum. If you start with, one advocacy, right? The affirmative is the only one who gets to advocate anything, okay? And the negative gets the status quo, right? So it's one advocacy per side, right? All the way to infinite advocacies, for both sides, right? And you say, and you start to, make your 5 arguments. Why would it be good if each side only got one advocacy, right? And why would it be bad? Well, no counterplans in that world, maybe. Et cetera, et cetera. Why would it be bad for each side to have infinite advocacies, right? The negative gets 40 counterplans, the affirmative gets 10 asks, right? Go. Okay. Yeah. Man. Okay. Well, you probably can't test them. You can't find the best one. You can't do your comparison, right? And so infinite advocacies, we know probably not where we want to be, right? But the debates that you have in the trenches, right, are happening in between that. It's the negative wants to defend, multiple advocacies, three advocacies, the status quo, a counterplan, and a critique alternative. Okay, when you start moving, well, that's getting a little closer to infinite. Or, that's getting close to multiple, right? You start to use those arguments from that part of the continuum. Right, the consistency of arguments, right? Do all your arguments have to be consistent? As one end, 100% consistency at one end of that continuum, right? Versus 100%, who cares, right? I can say socialism good, socialism bad, capitalism good, capitalism bad, economic growth good, economic growth bad, oil dependency good, oil dependency bad. I can say all of those things in the same debate on the same side, right? Who cares, right? That's one end, right? Versus, every word that comes out of your mouth, right, has to be consistent. Okay, well, that's where our areas of conditionality, dispositionality, those two continuums, number of advocacy and consistency, right, is where we start to evolve the performative contradiction debate, those kind of things, right? And then the role and importance of evidence, again, becomes, an important continuum relative to, theory arguments like solvency advocates. A lot of the fiat arguments are based on, the role of evidence, those kind of things. All right, a general framework for helping you to debate, these theory arguments, right? When you're trying to, when you actually are, I got to write some blocks on this stuff. What do you need to do? Well, the first thing is know what it is and know where it comes from. I'm a big fan. I was a history major in college and a communication major and those things, right? So all this discourse and representation case and genealogies and all those things, they really speak to me, because that was my, method. That was my method that I was taught, in my undergraduate and graduate and those things, right? And theory is one of those things where it really is important, to understand the genealogy of like where an argument comes from, right? To use dispositionality, for instance, all of you have this like such a precise, view of what you think dispositionality is. It's like, that is, if the affirmative straight turns, I'm stuck with my counterplan. If the affirmative straight turns it, otherwise I'm allowed to not go for my counterplan, et cetera, et cetera. Right? And you have this like, quite rigid view of dispositionality. Okay? Well, that's not how it started, certainly. Okay? The original purpose of dispositionality was the University of Kentucky did not want to say the word conditional when they were debating Eastern Illinois University, because Eastern Illinois had a reputation that if you made any part of your negative strategy conditional, they would literally just stake the entire debate on conditionality was bad. And I mean, and they did it at 100,000 miles per hour, wearing camouflage and combat uniforms and all sorts of things. They were quite a spectacle to watch. Watching debate and those things, right? And so, University of Kentucky was in a classroom at the University of Kansas, and they were like, "Hey, we want to run our counterplan, but we're not sure the counterplan solves." Right? And the counterplan didn't conflict with any of the other arguments, those kind of things. They were just worried it didn't solve, right? And so they wanted the ability to defend the status quo. And so they were like, look, if our counterplan doesn't solve, we want to not go for it, and we want to be able to say, vote for the status quo in our disad. Disad outweighs the case, right? And, then if you wanted to get rid of your counterplan, you had to say it was conditional, right? And they didn't want to say it was conditional. And they also didn't want to say it was conditional because really, the reason why you did conditional arguments is because you had things in tension. Your disad linked to your counterplan, right? Your critique and your counterplan, linked to each other, right? And so you need to be conditional because there was some tension among your arguments, right? Which was one of those, other continuums, the consistency, issue, right? So what they do, they pulled out a thesaurus, right? And they looked up, what were synonyms to the word conditional. Okay, and dispositional was on the list. And so then in the first cross-examination, when they ran the counterplan, and Eastern Illinois said, hey, University of Kentucky, what is the status of your counterplan? University of Kentucky looked over at Eastern Illinois and said it's dispositional. And they said, what does that mean? And they said, if it doesn't solve, then we reserve the right to defend the status quo, because it doesn't link to our disad. Counterplan, the disad doesn't link to the counterplan. So if you prove it doesn't solve, we want the right. And they said it's just like an if-then statement. If our counterplan doesn't solve, then we want to resort back to the status quo. That is our disposition of our counterplan, right? And that is why we are calling it dispositional. Well, that's the birth of dispositionality, right? Now, how it's morphed into straight turn and all of that stuff, right? Is what is all of your debates and how that's evolved and how you wanted to take, right, a term, right, and create that if then for it and those kind of things, right? And the same thing, conditionality comes from hypothesis testing. It comes from science. Right? It comes from, when scientists say, hey, I got a theory, and what do? They come up with, 25 null hypotheses to disprove that theory. That's where conditionality comes from. Okay? It doesn't come from multiple advocacies necessarily. It comes from the idea that the goal of the affirmative is to prove the resolution. The goal of the negative is to disprove the resolution. And if the negative can do that in multiple ways, right, then they've satisfied their burden of being negative, right? Conditionality comes from that continuum. What's the focus of the debate? Plan versus resolutional focus, right? It doesn't come from, the negative advocacies, right? So it's important to know that, right? Know the strategic uses. Why are they, what's the negative? Why is the negative running a particular counterplan? Because they want to focus the debate on this much of an issue, right? If I can have a counterplan, right, that solves 100% of your app, and the only thing that's wrong with it is maybe a little theory, and that now means that I need to win 1% risk of a disadvantage to win the debate or prove somebody has a bad day, for God's sakes, right? There's absurd judges out there, right, that's their calculation for net benefits. If the counterplan solves 100%, all the neg has to prove is like somebody has a bad day, right? And so, with that sort of absurdity, well, sure, if all I got to defend is, a theory of a counterplan, to create that kind of decision calculation, right, I'm going to do it, okay? Argument list, right? Every time you do a theory argument, you should think about creating the, what are the 5 reasons, right? And stick to your, first, 4, 3 to 5. We'll talk about that in a second about, what that does for a debate, right? Impact, we already talked about a little bit. And then adapt to your judge. This is a